Good Times wasn't just a sitcom, it was Friday night for millions of families. But behind that Evans family kitchen, there are secrets even die-hard fans never noticed. Today, we're uncovering 18 strange facts about Good Times that will change how you watch it, and one jaw-dropping bonus at the end that nobody talks about. So speed up with me, because the list starts now. Number 1. The Evans family finally got out. After 6 seasons of struggle, the Evans family got a real happy ending. But here's the thing, almost nobody remembers how big that ending actually was. The series finale, The End of the Rainbow, aired August 1st, 1979. In one episode, the writers handed the family every win they'd been chasing for years. Keith got signed to play football for the Chicago Bears. JJ's comic strip finally got published. Willona landed a new job. And Florida announced the family was leaving apartment 17C for a penthouse. Now check this out. For 6 seasons, this show never gave the family an easy break. James got laid off, rehired, then laid off again. Evictions loomed. That constant tension is why the ending worked. When good news arrived, it felt earned, not like a cheap sitcom wrap-up. Most sitcoms of the era just reset the status quo every season. Good Times let struggle actually matter, which made the payoff hit harder than almost anything else on TV that year. That's an ending that sticks with you for decades. But the story of how this family even got their names is even stranger. Number 2, Janet Jackson's first acting role. Before the world tours and the iconic albums, Janet Jackson was an 11-year-old actress carrying a brutal storyline on a network sitcom. She joined Good Times in season 5 as Penny Gordon, an abused girl adopted by Willona Woods, appearing in 48 episodes across the final 2 seasons. She'd appeared on the Jacksons' variety show before, but those were light and musical. This was something else entirely. Here's where it gets interesting. The Penny storyline was among the darkest material the show ever attempted. Her biological mother, Lynetta Gordon, was abusive in ways the show portrayed with surprising directness, including a scene where Penny is burned with a hot iron as punishment. The burning happened off-screen, but the before and after were shown, and the emotional weight landed fully. Jackson handled material that would be demanding for an adult, consistently, for 2 seasons. When the show ended in 1979, Jackson moved on to a new kind of family and different strokes before her music career exploded. But for anyone watching closely in 1977 and 1978, something unmistakable was already there. One of pop music's biggest icons started out playing one of the show's most painful characters. And speaking of pain behind the scenes, the next fact gets even stranger. Number 3. Leno and Letterman wrote jokes for JJJ. This is one of the most bizarre behind-the-scenes stories in TV history, and it barely ever gets mentioned. At the height of the show's popularity, Jimmie Walker started hiring struggling comedians to write one-liners for his stand-up act. 2 of them were a young Jay Leno and David Letterman, neither famous yet. Walker reportedly paid Letterman $150 a week. These sessions happened informally at Walker's place in Beverly Hills. But wait, there's more. Walker later got Leno a small guest appearance on the show itself during season 3. 2 future hosts of The Tonight Show and Late Night got some of their earliest paid work writing punchlines for a teenage sitcom character. Neither of them had any idea what they'd eventually become. It's a strange little crossroads in entertainment history, where 2 completely different career paths briefly overlapped years before anyone became a household name. Speaking of that catchphrase, it almost never made it to air at all. Number 4. The Dynomite. Catchphrase was nearly suppressed. Here's something that sounds impossible now. The single most iconic phrase from the show almost got killed before it caught on. Director John Rich first pushed Jimmie Walker to say Dynomite on camera at the end of season 1, episode 2, Black Jesus. Both Walker and Norman Lear were skeptical at first. Lear didn't think the line would land, but Rich insisted Walker keep using it, and the audience response changed everything almost overnight. Now for the wild part. The phrase landed on TV Land's list of the 100 greatest TV quotes ever, and merchandising exploded with t-shirts, posters, and a talking JJJ doll. But that same success became a major source of tension behind the scenes. As Esther Rolle grew frustrated with how the JJJ character dominated the show, Lear eventually restricted Walker to saying Dynomite no more than once per episode. Rolle had told Ebony magazine in 1975 that JJ couldn't read, couldn't write, and didn't think, and that the show was never supposed to be about that. The most famous line in the show's history was also quietly one of the most contested. Speaking of things that almost didn't happen, the art on the apartment walls has its own hidden story. Number 5. The real artwork behind JJ's paintings, J.J. Evans, was supposed to be an aspiring artist on the show. But here's the twist nobody knew at the time. He never painted a single one of those pieces. Every painting credited to JJ was actually created by a real artist named Ernie Barnes. Barnes had been a professional football player, suiting up for the Baltimore Colts, the New York Titans, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Denver Broncos, and clubs in the Canadian Football League before walking away from sports to paint full-time. Here's where it gets interesting. Barnes developed an unmistakable style. Elongated, expressive figures in vibrant color, many with their eyes closed, which he said represented how people are blind to each other's humanity. He even appeared in 2 episodes himself, credited only as First Hoodlum and First Hood, while quietly being the uncredited artist behind everything JJ supposedly created. Barnes's most famous piece, The Sugar Shack, didn't appear in the show until season 4, when it was added to the opening credits. It later appeared on the cover of Marvin Gaye's 1976 album, I Want You. One version of the painting sold at Christie's in 2022 for over $15 million. A record-shattering price for art most people only ever saw flash by during opening credits. Never knowing the character on screen didn't make it. The bonus fact at the end ties right back to the man who once played JJ's father. But first, let's go back to where this show actually came from. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 6, it's a spin-off of a spin-off. Most people never stop to think about where this show actually came from. But here's the thing, it didn't appear out of nowhere. Good Times was a spin-off of Maude, which itself spun off from All in the Family, making it a third-generation show, or as historians put it, a spin-off of a spin-off. Norman Lear was the creative force behind all 3, quietly reshaping American television throughout the decade. Now check this out. Florida Evans had originally appeared on Maude as Maude Findlay's housekeeper. When Lear gave Esther Rolle her own series, the character was lifted from an upper-middle-class household in Tuckahoe, New York, and dropped into Chicago's South Side. That wasn't a small tweak, it was a bold reinvention. Most spin-offs just shift the camera to a new character in the same world. Good Times rebuilt the entire universe around Florida from scratch, and that rebuild went deeper than most viewers ever realized. Number 7. Florida's husband had a different name. If you ever watched Maude reruns and then flipped to Good Times, something might have felt off. Here's why. On Maude, Florida was married to Henry Evans, a New York City firefighter, depicted as solidly black middle class. When Good Times went into production, the character's entire backstory got rewritten. Henry became James. His firefighter job became a rotating list of manual labor and odd jobs. The family relocated to Chicago's South Side, and James Evans Sr. was written as having only a 6th grade education, a massive change from the stable Henry on Maude. But wait, there's more. The continuity between the 2 shows simply doesn't line up, and it was never meant to. There's just one brief nod in the episode The Checkup, where Florida mentions having worked as a maid. But Maude is never named, and the Evans family is treated as though they'd always lived in Chicago. It's a fascinating example of how 1970s TV could rewrite a character's entire history and just expect audiences to go along with it. And the location they rewrote that history into was just as carefully chosen. Number 8. The family's address was a real detail. The Evans family lived at 963 North Gilbert Avenue, apartment 17C. On screen, the show never directly named the real housing project it was based on, but any Chicagoan watching in the 70s would have recognized it instantly. The opening and closing credits showed the distinctive red brick towers of the Cabrini Green housing complex with the Chicago skyline behind them. The show never said Cabrini Green out loud, but the imagery made it unmistakable. Cabrini Green was a very real, very complicated place. Construction began in 1942, and by the 1970s it had grown into a sprawling complex on Chicago's near North Side, becoming one of the most well-known public housing developments in the country. For people who actually lived there, see Seeing those towers on national TV every week meant something. That choice gave the show a grounding most sitcoms never bothered with. But ironically, the actual filming couldn't have been further from that world. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. Number 9. Filmed in California, not Chicago. Despite that authentic-looking Cabrini Green footage, the production of Good Times never set foot in Illinois, not once. The first 2 seasons were taped at CBS Television City in Hollywood. Starting in fall 1975, production moved to Metro Media Square, home base of Norman Lear's Tandem Productions. Every scene inside that apartment, the kitchen, the living room, the kids' bedroom, was filmed thousands of miles from the city it represented. Here's where it gets interesting. This was common practice for sitcoms of the era, driven by cost and logistics. Shooting in an actual Chicago housing project would have been complicated, expensive, and disruptive, but it's still striking given how grounded and specific the show felt. It's a fact that doesn't change the show itself, but completely reframes how you picture it being made. And the man who co-created this specific world had a personal reason for getting every detail right. Number 10. Eric Monti grew up in Cabrini Green. Co-creator Eric Monti wasn't just inventing things from a writer's room in Hollywood. He'd actually lived this world himself. Monti grew up in Chicago's public housing projects. He hitchhiked to Hollywood with virtually no money, no connections, and no professional credits. After theater classes at a community college, he spent 5 years working his way in, eventually selling Norman Lear a script for All in the Family before pitching the concept for Good Times. But here's the thing that stands out. The Evans family's struggles weren't invented for drama. They came directly from Monti's own childhood. He went on to co-create What's Happening for ABC, another landmark show centered on Black urban life, continuing to draw from real experience. Some of the most authentic moments on Good Times came from someone who'd actually lived in those towers, and the other co-creator had an equally personal connection, just in a different way. Number 11. Co-creator played another character on a Lear show. Here's a connection almost nobody catches, even on rewatch. Co-creator Mike Evans was already a familiar face to viewers, just not in the role you'd expect. At the time he helped pitch the Evans family concept to Norman Lear, Mike Evans was already playing Lionel Jefferson on All in the Family and would continue that role on The Jeffersons. The same actor was helping build one fictional black family for TV while appearing weekly as part of an entirely different one. Now check this out. The character of Michael Evans on Good Times was named after him, a quiet tribute most viewers never picked up on. It's the kind of detail that gets buried under decades of reruns. These overlapping connections weren't unusual, but it's a fun reminder of how tightly woven Lear's universe of 1970s sitcoms really was. And speaking of names that change behind the scenes, the Evans family almost wasn't called the Evans family at all. Number 12. The Evans family was originally named something else. When Mike Evans and Eric Monti first wrote the pilot script, the family wasn't named Evans at all. The father was John, the mother was Maddie, and the kids were JJ, Thelma, and Michael. But when Norman Lear came on as executive producer and attached the project to Esther Rolle, bringing her existing Florida character along, the family had to be renamed to match what Maude had already established. The parents became James and Florida Evans, locking in the identity audiences would know for 6 seasons. It's easy to assume a show's characters were always destined to have those names, but Good Times shows how one casting decision, attaching an actress's existing character to a new project, can quietly rewrite a show's entire point of origin before a single episode airs. That kind of last-minute restructuring happened more than once, and the next one involves an age gap that's almost impossible to believe. Number 13. Jimmie Walker was a decade older than his character. When Good Times premiered, J.J. Evans was supposed to be 17. Jimmie Walker, cast to play him, was 26. That's a real gap if you stop to think about it. The age difference was easy to miss because the show's energy carried everything. Walker's physicality and comedic instincts made the character feel genuinely young. But here's where it gets even stranger. Walker was only about 8 years younger than John Amos, who played his father, James Evans Sr., supposedly a man in his late 30s or 40s. The math simply doesn't add up. Now check this out. None of that mattered when the show was running at full speed. Audiences weren't doing arithmetic on fictional birth certificates. They were responding to chemistry, timing, and energy. It's a great example of performance overriding the literal facts on the page. That creative flexibility extended into how the show built its visual identity too, especially one very specific neighborhood detail. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations. And tell me in the comments, do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. Number 14, a geographic inconsistency was built in good times, was set on Chicago's South Side, and the characters constantly referenced their South Side neighborhood. But here's the catch most viewers never noticed. The exterior footage in the opening and closing credits showing the actual housing project was filmed at Cabrini Green, which sits on Chicago's near North Side. These are two different areas miles apart, with very different histories. For anyone who didn't know Chicago well, this would be invisible. The footage felt right and matched the show's tone. But for viewers who knew the city's geography, the mismatch would have been obvious. The show's heart was in the South Side, but its visual face belonged to the North Side. It's a small inconsistency, but it rewards close, repeated viewing. The kind of thing you'd only catch after watching this show dozens of times. And speaking of details that took years to reveal themselves, the apartment door itself hid a strange little secret. Number 15. The Evans apartment door was never locked. This one is easy to miss because it's just background noise. But once you notice it, you can't stop. Throughout the series, the front door of the Evans apartment was seemingly never locked. Characters like Willona and Bookman, neighbors, even strangers, would walk straight in without knocking or being buzzed in. Here's where it gets interesting. This was a comedic convention that kept scenes flowing, letting characters pop in and out without pausing for doorbells. Countless sitcoms use this shortcut. But it's completely at odds with what life in a real Chicago housing project actually looked like in the 1970s, where security and privacy were serious concerns. It's a tiny contradiction that exists purely for comedic pacing, only visible once you start paying attention to how casually people wander into that apartment. Television logic and real-world logic don't always line up. Speaking of gaps between TV and reality, the cast's relationships off-camera might surprise you too. Number 16. The cast barely spoke off-camera. The warmth between the Evans family on screen was, in many ways, almost entirely a performance. Here's what was actually happening once cameras stopped rolling. Jimmie Walker stated in interviews that during the entire run from 1974 to 1979, he doesn't remember saying a single word to John Amos or Esther Rolle that wasn't part of a scripted scene. The cast simply didn't socialize. There was no falling out, no specific incident. They just kept their professional and personal lives separate. But wait, there's more. Walker has said the distance actually made things easier. No off-screen conflicts, no politics bleeding into scenes. Yet when you consider how natural the family felt together, the bickering, the inside jokes, the way Florida and James moved around each other in that kitchen, it becomes one of those acting feats that looks effortless, precisely because it actually wasn't. Great on-screen chemistry doesn't always require real friendship behind the scenes, just enough professional skill to fake it for 5 years straight. And one cast member's insistence on a specific family structure shaped the whole show before it even aired. Number 17. Esther Rolle had conditions before taking the role. Esther Rolle agreed to star in Good Times, but not without pushing back hard on the original concept first. Her objection wasn't small, and it shaped the entire show. Her chief concern was that the show not feature a single-parent household. She insisted Florida have a husband, a strong, present father, because she believed it was important to show that family structure for Black audiences at a time when television rarely did. That insistence brought John Amos into the picture as James Evans Sr. Now check this out. Rolle felt Black fathers were consistently shown as absent or diminished on television, and she wasn't willing to be part of that pattern. Because she stood her ground before production began, the entire shape of the series changed. It's remarkable how much influence a single performer's principles can have on a show's foundation, long before audiences ever see the result. And what happened to that same actor years later connects directly to our bonus fact. All almost at the end, and the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Number 18. Esther Rolle's return came with a hidden condition. Esther Rolle left the show after season 4, unhappy with the direction of the JJ character and the writing overall. But her return for season 6 came with a condition almost nobody remembers. The character of Carl Dixon, the man Florida had married and moved away with in the season 4 finale, had to be completely erased. Not killed off, not even referenced, just gone. Rolle believed it was implausible for the devoutly religious Florida to have remarried so quickly after James's death to someone who was an avowed atheist. She insisted Carl be written out entirely, with no explanation to the audience. Here's where it gets interesting. When season 6 began, Carl simply didn't exist anymore. A deleted scene reportedly showed Willona asking Florida about Carl, with Florida silently shaking her head, implying he died of lung cancer. But even that brief acknowledgement never made the broadcast version. Audiences were just expected to move on. It's a striking example of how much creative control one returning star could exercise over a show's continuity, even retroactively erasing a storyline. And the man whose absence started all of this, James Evans himself, has one final story behind it that almost nobody talks about. And now, the bonus fact. The one we teased at the very start of this video. Bonus: John Amos was essentially fired over disagreements with the writers. John Amos loved this show in its early form, but as the series progressed, he grew increasingly frustrated with the writing room. In his own words, he felt he understood how a black father would actually behave better than the writers did, none of whom were black at the time. He wasn't always diplomatic about saying so. He later admitted he wasn't tactful, and more than a few confrontations ended with him suggesting they take the argument outside, which didn't go over well with the writing staff. By the end of season 3, Norman Lear told him his contract would not be renewed. Amos told Jet magazine in 1976 this was, in his words, the same as being fired. But here's where it gets genuinely heartbreaking. The writers killed James Evans off-screen in a car accident, with the news delivered to Florida at the start of season 4. It led to one of the most famous moments in the show's history. Florida receiving the news of her husband's death, holding herself together through the whole episode while her children fell apart around her. And then, once the room cleared and she was alone, breaking down completely and repeating, "Damn, damn, damn," as she threw a vase against the wall. That single moment became one of the most emotionally raw scenes in 1970s television, and Esther Rolle's performance has been cited for decades as one of the finest in sitcom history. Years later, before his death in 2024, Amos made peace with Norman Lear, describing their relationship as tumultuous but magical. So the most devastating moment the show ever produced exists only because of a behind-the-scenes argument that got out of hand. A creative conflict turned into one of television's most powerful moments of grief, almost by accident. And those were 18 strange facts about Good Times, plus that bonus story nobody talks about. This show mattered more than people gave it credit for, giving millions of families a reflection of their own lives that television had almost never shown before, wrapped in warmth, humor, and honesty. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and comment which facts surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another show that deserves a list of strange facts like this one. See you in the next video.